Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Let Fear Bounce. This is Kim Langley, your host, and I'm so glad that you're deciding to spend just a small part of your day with myself today and my special returning guest, Edward Di Gangi. I'm so happy to welcome him back. He was on 3 years ago, folks, with his first book, and now we're going to chat about his second book. He is an adoptee who began exploring his roots at the age of 69 when a quiet moment in the cemetery sparked a life-changing journey. Now, he was visiting his adoptive parents at the time. That spark that led to a search of his birth mother, which led to the discovery of a rich family history, heartfelt reunions, and the inspiration for his memoir, The Gift Best Given, his first book. And now his latest book, which is just recently released, Gliding Through Goodbye. Ed currently lives in North Carolina with his wife and enjoys life close to family and the stories that connect us all. Ed, welcome back to Let Fear Bounce.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation to return. Thank you, Kim.
I've been looking forward to this because your first book was fascinating. I loved the story that you shared and the journey that you shared a few years ago when you were on talking about what was your birth mother, how you found out about her story and how you came to be where you were at, and the background of why she had to let you go at that time in her life, and the culture at that time in history. So share a little bit about that first book, and then we'll roll right into the second book and how
Sure, sure.
that journey is all unfolding for you.
Yeah, basically, I had an idyllic childhood, and I suppose if I started this project at 69, I had an idyllic adulthood as well. Uh, I had a very, very good adoptive experience, and I think that it's probably important to point out not everybody does.
Right.
It's adoption is a kind of a fraught subject. Some folks are privileged to have a wonderful experience, some, not so. But I had one of the good experiences, and as you said, it was just kind of a coincidental experience. We're standing over the gravestone of my adoptive mother's father and mother in a cemetery in New Jersey. And I started thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to know more about these people who I had always assumed or felt were my family? And, when we got back to North Carolina where we live, I went to the library and they had ancestry.com sitting on their computers there, and I brought my grandparents' names with me and the little bit I knew about them, plugged it in, and was welcomed with a fairly good mass of information that came back right away. And having never given a lot of thought about the identity of my birth mother, I was sitting there thinking if it's this easy to find information about, basically Ukrainian peasant farmers who emigrated at the turn of the century from the 1800s into the 1900s. I wonder what I could find out about my birth mother. And my adoption had been privately arranged. And I knew that we had a fireproof box at home with all of our important papers, and my adoptive mother, excuse me, had saved the papers surrounding my adoption. And I went back and I pulled out that adoption decree, and there were four signatures on that piece of paper: my adoptive parents, their attorney. For some reason, I knew that was the attorney all these years, and another signature for a name I did not recognize. Intuitively, I knew it was my birth mother. So I went back to the library with that new name, plugged it in, and that's really how the book took place. It opened up what was a fascinating story, and what I found was a woman who was 23 years old when I was born. Um, she was a celebrity performer in the big ice skating shows of the 1940s and the 1950s. And armed with the first bit of information, I went on a search to learn more about her. And, given my age, and I was at just reaching my 69th birthday at the time, I didn't feel I was going to be very lucky and find her still alive. I did not. Unfortunately, she had passed away 4 years before I began my search. But I came into reunion with a half sibling on my maternal side. So her son from the marriage she entered into 7 years after I was born. I was the result of a summer romance. And I don't believe my father ever knew I existed. And I had really given little thought to who my father was, but it's sort of coincidental to this whole search. I had done a DNA sample, and up popped somebody who turned out to be my paternal half brother.
Oh,
So I found out who dad was. He and my mother were together when he was between the second and third of five wives.
oh,
So he was a ladies' man,
he
obviously.
was busy.
Yeah, he was a very busy man. And he had already passed away as well when I began my search, but I'm in reunion with my paternal half brother as well, and he shared information, and it's been a very nice relationship. We don't speak all that often, but when we do, it's a prolonged conversation. And it's kind of like it was yesterday that we spoke, so I'm very happy with that. Um, I entered into writing this book, The Gift Best Given, uh, pretty naively about what adoption was all about.
Mm,
And I sort of saw it all my life as kind of a transaction. A woman, for whatever reason, a woman who is pregnant for whatever reason finds she cannot keep her child, finds somebody else to take that child from her, or the child is taken from her in a social services sense. And then she just goes and moves on with life. And the more I wrote and the more I investigated, I learned that could not possibly have been the case with my mother, or with any mother for that matter. And I became more and more interested in the birth mother experience, and just came up with a pretty profound respect for what that experience is like for a woman, from the point that she carries that child, to making the decision that I will not keep that child, and then ultimately putting it into somebody else's hands. And then learning that that doesn't go away. There's life after the relinquishment. And having had that aha moment with my mother's story, I started contacting other women who in the pre-Roe v. Wade era,
mm.
and it was the era that ended, at the end of world began at the end of World War II and went right up to Roe v. Wade. They called it the baby scoop era. And these were the
Oh, that's what it
women.
was called?
Yeah, yeah.
I had not ever heard that. That's not a very nice way of putting it,
It's
is it?
not. No, these were women who essentially were sent away and were not given any real agency, and
Right.
in the decision making. They were kind of hidden. The babies were delivered, and in most cases, the women were sent home to their families, and the babies were moved elsewhere, to other parents.
And
And
everyone's
in
told to just, all right, done. Now go live your
Forget
life.
about it.
Yeah,
Forget about it.
not
This never
possible.
happened. And
Right.
there could be nothing, nothing, nothing farther from the truth.
Right.
And that's essentially what I heard. I spoke to probably 15 moms who were just so open and so brave talking about it. And they told me about the events leading up to the adoption, but to a woman, there was not one who didn't say with some frequency after that, and this is, some gave their children up 50 years ago. There's always moments when I think about that child. Did I make the correct decision?
Yeah.
Is the child safe? And these are now 50-year-old children or 60-year-old
But to
children in
that,
some
but to that
cases.
woman, always an infant.
Yeah, it's their baby.
Yeah.
And I know there are cases where maybe that's not true, but I believe in the vast majority of cases, yeah, it is. It's quite true. And, some women said, I think of that child every day when I go to bed or when I wake up. Some say, well, Christmas comes around or a holiday, or I know his birthday. Those are my days and just don't bother me, because
How
I get to
hard.
deal with it.
But it
But
was such a different time culturally.
oh, absolutely. And these women all came from different places and different ethnicities, different races, different financial situations,
Mhm.
but all of them shared that same group of emotions. There was shame, there was humiliation, there was embarrassment, there was the need to keep a secret. And I think for the most part, the secrecy was a very big part for many of them. It's, I've got my children, I've got my new husband, and I haven't shared a bit of it with anyone. It's something I need to
How
carry.
heavy that would be to carry for so long,
Absolutely.
decades even, you know?
Yeah, when I discovered my mother's identity and learned about the relationship with the man who she married, I don't have any doubt in my mind that she never, never, never shared, what had gone on with him.
Oh,
And that's a hard thing. They were married 45 years. And so it's just perpetuates the secrecy.
yeah.
And I think that's a positive about what's going on now. At least this is talked about and it doesn't need to be hidden, you know.
When it's not such a, you don't have well, maybe I'm sure you do somewhere, and maybe in some cultures it still is. You've brought shame upon the family. We're sending you to Aunt Lily's
Yeah.
for 9 months,
And Lily had a
or
lot of
you're going
visitors over the
abroad
years.
for 9 months,
Exactly. Exactly. And it's interesting. A handful of the women who I talk to are active in the adoption community and in dealing with the younger women who are now going through the same thing in a different social setting,
Hmm.
I think, but they report back that, the women are still saying there's embarrassment, there's humiliation, and I don't like to talk about it. So the events are still being hidden.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm not in that realm, so I just don't know enough about it. And how fascinating. What a fascinating journey though that took you on.
Yeah, it's interesting. People are very interested in the adoptees. They're interested in the adoptive mothers. And there's not a whole lot talked about with the first mothers or the birth mothers.
Right. Like
And there are a
yeah,
couple.
what was going on in their life at the time, and gosh, because
I,
I can't even imagine how difficult it would be, no matter the circumstance or what you may have told yourself or were telling yourself at the time. There's no way you can carry a baby to term, give birth, and then forget
and
about
forget about it. No,
it. And
yeah,
as a mother myself, I know for sure I couldn't.
right.
So how hard, and sad, because that's such a weight that they've carried, and many probably still do today, that carrying that weight and that knowledge and feeling that they're unable to share about it.
I agree thoroughly. I was there. We have one son. He's 34 years old now. I was there for his birth, and it's a magical experience to see somebody come into life and come into the world. But there was never any doubt but that we were going to bring him home,
Right.
and he was our son. Uh, this past Easter Sunday, he and his wife, who was expecting a child at the end of May, were in Charleston, South Carolina, and we got a text message at 4:30 in the morning that Renee is in labor. So this is 5 weeks early.
Oh,
So we scurried to Charleston, South
yeah.
Carolina. Her parents were about 30 minutes behind us, and they had a little girl who was born 5 weeks early, but totally healthy. And because she was premature, they had to keep her in the NICU. And we went up to visit, and we sat there, and with this whole new experience of having investigated my mother's life and interviewing all these other women, I was sitting there looking at, at this little baby and looking at our daughter-in-law. And it sort of takes your breath away thinking about somebody walking into that room saying, "Nice job, healthy baby, gotta go," and picking up that baby and leaving with it. Yeah, I can't fathom it. I just could
No.
not.
The way I
Because
think of it is it would be ripping a part of your soul out of you,
it is.
you know?
And it's, I fear that some people think that's over dramatized.
I don't think
I
so.
can assure you by the experience of the 15 women I had conversations with, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a real experience.
No, I completely believe you. I can't even imagine, I can't. I have no words for that because I've not ever been in that position.
Yeah.
How
So,
hard that would be.
yeah. So when the gift best given was put out and had its life out in public, there were lots and lots of people who, first thing was you should make a movie out of this.
It would
Being
be a
short,
good one.
yeah, being short several million dollars. I haven't gotten to that yet. Uh,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of people pitching, a lot of filmmakers. We just have not yet. But the other response was, well, what happened to Genevieve next? And Genevieve was my birth mother.
hmm
So I kind of noodled around with two or three ideas of, how do you tell her story? Because obviously there's a lot left to her life. But I think the part that resonated, that really connected to this adoption piece was tracing her life in the years afterwards, after relinquishing me. So my first thought was to let her have a conversation with the woman at the hospital who had kind of nurtured her through this, because Genevieve kept my birth and the adoption totally secret from her
hmm
family. And there was a woman who kind of stepped in and took a mother's role to hold her hands as she navigated this. So I said, well, I could have Genevieve come back, and there was her parents' anniversary in 1962, and Genevieve could go and visit, with this woman and just sort of tell, here's what's happened the past 14 years. And that was going to be a very cumbersome conversation. So what I did instead is I recreated my mother's diary. And I did that. I've said it was inspired by a sheaf of notes that I was privileged to come across that my mother wrote prior to her passing.
Now, how did those come about? How did they come to you?
They came to me through my half brother.
Oh, okay.
And
So
it's interesting.
that relationship helped.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And he passed them on to me. And it's very interesting, though, certainly if you speak with him, he said, Mama wrote these for me. When you read them, though, it makes some references. And then my husband said, and then, it talks about people not as your father or your uncle, but sort of as third party characters. So there's a romantic part of me that said, oh, she knew I was going to find her at some point. She wrote them for me.
Right.
I don't know if that's the case or not.
Yeah, yeah, you'll
But
never know.
yeah, she recorded it. But yes, there
So
was
when
not,
he did she record that she gave a child up for
she
adoption?
did not. She did
Oh.
not.
So, but you reading it could see little glimpses of something in there.
Yeah, yeah. When at the part
Okay.
where, where I come into the picture, she had to go home because her mother was sick. That's why she had to stop her ice skating career at the time.
Oh,
So, so, obviously I would have recognized a whole other story.
right, of course. So she
Somebody
she
else,
did. She kept it secret her
uh,
entire the rest of her life.
Oh, absolutely.
even in
So,
her own personal diaries.
yep. Yeah, so what I used those notes for, obviously there was interesting information. There was not a lot there I didn't already know. But what it did is it served sort of as a writing guide or a style guide to say, okay, these are the way she structured her sentences.
Hmm.
She wrote kind of in short sentences and there were not a lot of conjunctions there. It was just, just thought, thought, thought. So that's kind of the way I restructured this diary. And the diary is then traces number one, her physical journey. About 5 months after I was born, she returned to skating and touring. And over the next 8 years between the time I was relinquished and the time she found herself pregnant with her first son by her new husband, she traveled all around the United States. She traveled to South America and Europe. And I was able to do a lot of research that could put me right in the right place at the right time. And it was really quite interesting to do that. So, I have not a daily entry for her, but every month, 2 or 3 or 4 entries talking about, where did the journey physically take her? But more importantly, what was the emotional journey? What was she still carrying with her in terms of emotional baggage? And and most of that was built out on the conversations that I had with these 15 women and other reading that I had done.
Yeah.
So they would tell me things about, I would think about who's your mother? Where are you right now? What are you doing for your birthday? And all of those things then get interwoven with the physical, here I am in Paris. And here's what I'm doing. I went to the Louvre and I saw the greatest painting in the world and the greatest museum in the world. I hope someday you can travel like I do.
Yeah.
So and the story, I don't want to give it all away.
Right. Don't don't give spoilers.
It does have a story arc to it, which I was concerned with at first because nobody wants to just hear, poor me, poor me, poor me, and I'm in Paris. But it has a start and it does have an end. But I think more importantly, it really does relay a birth mother's experience having given up a child for adoption.
I think that maybe there might be a lot of adoptive children of any age that could benefit from reading it.
I would like to think so. I think there are, I if you go on social media, there are a number of adoptee groups,
Oh, I'm sure.
and you hear some very raw stories. And people will very legitimately say, that was never my story, that was never my mother.
Yeah.
But I think by the same token, I think there are a lot of people who are, I don't think are cognizant of what their birth mother's story may have been.
I mean,
And
because each circumstance would be so different.
oh, sure.
Someone could be, it could have been from the result of rape or incest, you know, something tragic, horrible, or just, two teenagers.
Yeah,
And, she's getting ready to go to college and her life is planned out, and this is not part of the plan.
right.
So mommy and daddy are going to help her take care of things. You never
Yeah,
know. Or maybe someone's, addicted to alcohol or drugs or something and found themselves pregnant and not physically or mentally able to care for a child.
right.
This, gosh, the circumstances, it's so wide ranging.
When I have these discussions, all I ask is, be kind to yourself first. You are not less a person because you were adopted.
Right.
Take the one moment to think that, maybe there's some other story that underlies your adoption. And again, yes. there are some pretty terrible stories out there.
Yes, yes.
But by the same token, there are probably stories that are not told that, we'd all be better if we could delve into them and understand them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
Each person, it would be a completely different, well, a whole nother book.
it's
Each person, that's what I've said before. Each of us as a human being, we're all our own, we're all part of history. So we all are either you want to be a chapter or you want to be an actual book.
yeah, that's a great way to put it.
You
It's a
know, and
great way to put
I
it.
don't think I want to just be a chapter.
No, we've all got stories, and it
That's
doesn't.
right. And they start from someone else's story.
Yeah,
So the circumstances could be horrible. And I completely understand that. And I think, though, as I get older, I try to at least be mindful that I was never in that person's shoes. So I
right.
really shouldn't judge. I mean, sometimes it's hard not to. Yeah, we're human. But it's so, I don't know. I've found that as I age, I sit there and say, okay, but what's their backstory?
Yeah,
What brought them to the point in their life that they're at now? Not that it would change anything, but that's just how my brain works. I'm
but
curious.
understand it at least.
Right. You want to
It's
have at
interesting.
least a glimmer, at least a spark of understanding, because, like you said earlier, be kind to yourself. Don't think yourself less than because you're adopted.
And I think a
I
lot.
read somewhere that if you're adopted, it was an adoptive parent. I don't know if it was on a show or in a book or article or something, but explaining to the child that they were adopted and because they were unable to have children themselves. Of course, that's another, circumstance, another part of the story, but that this child was, specifically chosen and how special that is, to be adopted. So
Yeah, and
give
there's
me,
a.
I don't know. Because I'm not part of it. I'm not adopted. These are just my own thoughts, around the topic. What are your thoughts on that? On what I just said, I guess.
Years and years ago, I had a conversation with a minister, and I'm not a very religious person, but I let it be known that I was adopted, and he said precisely that. Oh, it must be wonderful that you were picked out by your parents, and that just rang terribly wrong with me,
Oh,
even though I had a wonderful experience. You
why
know,
is that? Why is that?
it just didn't feel good, and I think were you to assemble a random group of adoptees and throw that into the middle, they would all jump in and they would just tear it apart.
Wow, see, interesting stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's sort
I'm
of.
glad you shared that because, like I said, that's just my thought from. I'm not in that realm. I really don't know anything about adoption. I'm not adopted.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't even know anyone who's been adopted. Well, I know you. But what an interesting perspective that
I'll
I
give
never
you a
would have thought
ter I'll
of.
give you a terrible analogy. You
Okay.
know, go to your local ASPCA and go through the pound, and you can go cage by cage by cage and said, I'm picking out that one. And I think a lot of people sort of see it that way, that
Oh.
you were
Now
kind
see,
of,
I wasn't looking at it that way.
and
Now
I
I
don't know if
see.
that's accurate or not, but
Well, if it's that's your perspective.
yeah,
I'm glad you shared that.
because I still have those papers that my mother kept. And now and then I'll say, I've got my adoption decree or my adoption papers. You go to the ASPCA, you get adoption papers there too.
You're
We're,
right.
we're and I was
That's a
terribly.
whole nother book. That's a whole nother
Yes.
book.
And there are books out there on it, I think. It's
How interesting. Well, because and that you brought that analogy up. My dogs have all been rescued from shelters, and I did go in and say, okay, that's the one.
Yeah, and I think you get a lot of people say we're not shelter dogs, you know. So there's a lot
Okay,
of.
I can see where someone would feel that or think that or say that. I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, see, and I didn't particularly feel that,
Yeah.
but it just when he said it, it just it just rang wrong. It rang wrong, and now
Interesting.
as I've become more familiar with the adoption community, yeah, maybe I understand that. I don't know.
No, that's a really good analogy. Well, first off, I'm glad you're not offended of me speaking in my ignorance,
No, that's
but this is how we learn,
yeah.
having these open dialogues. I'm so glad that you shared that because now that's taught me something in the future, should I ever be talking to someone who's been adopted, you
Yeah,
know?
I think really what it is, there are a lot of people who are adopted feel that they were rejected, by their yeah, by the fact that somebody would give away a human life.
Yeah, maybe it's hard to,
And
is it hard? Now, I guess here's a question for you. And then we're going to get ready to wrap up. So, as you said, that adoptees feel maybe carry something rejection with them. Did you ever carry that with you? And do you still, if you did, do you still carry a
I
smidgen of that?
never did. I never did, but I would
How
tell you
blessed
that
you were.
I just and I think part of it is just personality or genetics. I don't know what it is. I don't, but I know there are lots of people who do,
Yeah.
and I don't for a second deny them that feeling. It's the trauma of being separated. And I think my what I benefited from is I was taken home at a day old by my adoptive parents. So I think there was a greater chance for the nurture part to kick in.
Yeah, you've known nothing else but that.
That's all I ever knew.
Yeah.
Now you get the children who even weeks or months are put into foster care until an adoption goes through.
Right.
And there's kind of that limbo period in the middle, and you're not quite sure where it is you belong. So it's
That would take a toll mentally. And I think people might not think, or they just assume, oh, they're too young to remember. There's emotional memory involved, I think in a lot of that for younger children.
this may have a basis in science. It may be totally woo-woo, but I wrote in The Gift Best Given about my mother while she was still pregnant, playing the record of Peter and the Wolf, which was kind of a children's symphony. And after I wrote the book, I went looking on YouTube and just put in Peter and the Wolf and found a children's performance that was going on with the Vancouver Symphony, I think. And it was a conductor explaining all the parts of it as the clarinet kicked in I found myself in tears watching it. And I don't know if that's music that came through her belly and I took into life with me, but it was very emotional.
No,
So
I can understand that. I relate to that. There are certain songs I played a lot while I was pregnant,
yeah,
and they are to this day several of my daughter's favorite all-time songs.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I know my wife talked to our baby and
Yeah.
with some detriment sang to him, but
Yeah.
but I think that transfers at a certain point.
I think
The
so too. I
child
don't consider
absorbs
it
it.
woo-woo at all. I,
Yeah,
I because simply because of my own experience with my daughter, you know,
right.
of certain things. Edward, this has been so fascinating. I mean, we could continue to talk for a very
We
long time
could.
because I have a lot more questions. But so that just means we have to have you back on.
I'd be happy.
Yes, absolutely. Because I mean, it's an important topic. And I think that folks, I was educated today and I'm very thankful for that. And I'm always hoping I am. Each day I want to be educated on something I really don't know nothing about. So if I am, I can go forth with a little more empathy in certain circumstances that we need to learn stuff every day. So
I
thank you
think that
for
I
teaching me
think that
today.
I think that, gee, you're lucky you were adopted. You got picked out special. That's the one everyone should drop from their vocabulary.
Good
It's,
point.
it's yeah,
Yeah. And
that's just,
that was the only thing I could think of was I think I saw it on television where the woman was saying, well, how blessed you were to be chosen. And I knowing that what you shared now, obviously the person wasn't saying that to be negative in any way,
oh, of course not. But that's
but
kind of the candy coating on what some people see as a negative experience.
yeah,
Not everybody
interesting
was that
stuff.
fortunate.
Yeah, interesting perspective because my brain wouldn't have went that direction
Yeah.
because I
I
haven't
think
walked in those shoes.
I'm as lucky as hell to have been adopted. I've seen what my life could have been like, and
Yeah,
I am grateful that I was. But again, that's my story. It's not everybody's.
right. Everybody's is completely different.
Yeah.
That is right. Wow. What a great conversation. Thank you.
Oh, you're
I
welcome. Thank
appreciate all
you.
your insight
Yeah,
and
thank you for the opportunity.
yeah, now let everybody know where they can find you and your books and all that good stuff.
Yes, the my website is www.digangieauthor.com, and Digangi is spelled Digan, like Nancy, GI. Um, the gift best given is currently available for sale there. I trust by the time our podcast airs that Gliding Through Goodbye will also be there. Both of them are available wherever you purchase your books. So, in your local brick and mortar store or from your favorite online retailer, the books are out there. Um, and you can check the website for conversations like these. I love to talk about the adoption story, the discovery story, and just general like this. I think it's offers some opportunities for education, and I learn as I talk.
Right, right. And we learn as we listen.
Yes, we do.
It's always good to be a good listener. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today on Let Fear Bounce. This has been enlightening and insightful, and I'm so thankful and blessed because of this conversation. So thank
Kim,
you.
I appreciate the invitation to come back and talk with you again. Great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Let Fear Bounce. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And, hey, put in the comments, share this episode with folks that you think might benefit from it, especially those folks that may be adopted. Maybe it'll give them a little spark or a little insight as well, and help maybe alleviate something that they might be carrying with them. Who knows? That's what we're all here for, folks. We're tossing out nuggets of hope, by golly. And Ed, I forgot, at the end of each episode, I ask all of my guests to toss out a nugget of hope to the listeners today. So, what would your nugget of hope be for those who are listening?
Well, my nugget of hope would be that we will all be compassionate to one another and compassionate to ourselves. Be good to yourself, be good to the people around you, and I think we'll be in a better place.
What a world it would be if we all did
Yes.
that, huh? Beautiful nugget. Once again, thank you, Ed, for being my guest on Let Fear Bounce. It's been a true
Thank you,
pleasure.
Kim.
Everybody out there, thank you for tuning in once again. This is Kim Langling, your host of Let Fear Bounce. Everybody be well, stay well, and above all, be blessed.
Kindness. It's simple, powerful, and free. Yet, it holds the extraordinary ability to change someone's day or even their life. In the book, Nuggets of Hope, Cultivate Kindness, available on Amazon, you'll find stories of spreading kindness through simple acts. Grab your copy of Nuggets of Hope today and discover how you can transform your world with kindness. Let's make the world a little brighter together. Order your copy of Nuggets of Hope, Cultivate Kindness on Amazon.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Let Fear Bounce. New episodes drop each week, folks, on YouTube and Spotify and most listening platforms. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and do all the things. So until next time, folks, take a deep breath, be kind to yourself, and as always, let fear bounce.